During the really stressful times in our life's journey together, my spouse and sorry, Mark, I got to bring you in. I owe you $10 or something. I think it's a rule for preachers bringing in their family members into sermons. I owe him a lot of money. During the really stressful times in our lives' journey together, my spouse and I are really grateful for the generous support of others along the way. Neither of us are very good at asking for help. We both found that when things seemed most impossible, someone always showed up with words of wisdom or some form of visible support. And looking back, I can name dozens upon dozens of times that has happened. However, when immersed in those stressful, those difficult or worrisome moments along life's journey, looking back, we found that when we were most overwhelmed, doubt always found a way to creep in and to capitalize on our exhaustion, on our worries, and on our fears. See, doubt feeds worry and fear. It whispers a story that isn't quite true. A story that makes you question your worth, your faith, your ability, your strength, perhaps even the presence of God in those moments. We think oftentimes if we're faithful enough, or perhaps if we are worthy enough, God will take better care of us. But that is also part of this doubt creeping story. You're not faithful enough to be cared by God. But belonging to a God that shows up in others, the God of incarnation, the God of promise and love, the one that shows their face in the face of those who show up unannounced, unsolicited, and offer support, that is the true story. And all along, if you look back at those moments in your life where someone has showed up when you needed them most, you realize you do not have to be firmly planted in your faith to receive God's love. God's faithfulness to you is unwavering. And faithfulness, another fruit of the Spirit, is our focus for today. This fruit, faithfulness, is again often understood as a call to us to become more dependable, committed to God, and trustworthy. Yet the foundation of Christian faithfulness is not found in our ability to do better, strive harder. It is found in trusting that even in our worst attempts at life, our worst attempts to be good humans, devout Christians, even in our lowest moments, our fears and our worries, God remains persistently faithful to us. Before we ask how faithful we are invited by God to notice how faithful God is and has been in being present and providing for us and sustaining us and forgiving us and guiding us and healing us and supporting us. But we are human. And when we are in the thick of things and in that grasp of fear and sorrow and worry, it is easier to be consumed by it than to lift up our eyes and look to see God's faithfulness and the helpers that show up in our lives. I really love that hymn we sang, "Great is Thy Faithfulness." It is one of my favorite ways to remind myself of the nearness of God. I often will hum the tune. This hymn gives voice to a deep spiritual truth. God's faithfulness is not occasional or dependent on our performance. And that sentence that says, "All I have needed, Thy hand hath provided," are the words I often sing when I am in the throes of doubt. These words direct my attention away from anxiety about what I cannot do towards what I can rely on, what my heart can trust. All that I need, thy hand hath provided. The sacred words do not suggest that every desire is granted or that life is free of hardship. Rather, they invite us to recall and recognize how God's presence and provision often become visible only when we pause, look back, and consider how we have been carried through circumstances we could not possibly have managed on our own. Through this fruit of the Spirit, God provides us a model of faithfulness to live into. A model that includes an understanding that reliability and courage and loyalty and integrity and the willingness to remain present with others actually grows this fruit within us. Faithfulness grows as we learn to trust that God is already at work in us and around us in all things. There was a requirement of becoming a pastor. You have to do a bazillion hours of chaplaincy work. And one of those opportunities of mine was experiencing that in a Catholic hospital, which I've shared with you in the past. And there was a moment, it was a week of failures as far as being a chaplain. Sometimes you walk into a room and you don't have the answers to why someone has suddenly passed, or why a surgery has gone wrong, or why relationships are so broken that there's no one to visit the sick in their hospital room. And I remember feeling sort of ill-equipped and going down to sit with my supervisor, because you were forced to recall your day every day and to look back upon what was good and perhaps not so good. And I remember saying I felt so helpless. Where was my faith? Where was this strength of call when those who were dying needed it most? Where was the assurance that I knew everything was going to be okay? And why couldn't I articulate that? And I remember my supervisor looking at me saying, "Oh, Anne-Marie, God was in that room before you entered. God will remain in that room once you leave. Put your hope in God's faithfulness." As Christians, there is this narrative that we must become more faithful before we are worthy of God's love. This can turn spiritual growth into a burden of constant self-evaluation. We may ask whether we have prayed enough or served enough or believed enough or remained strong enough. But the gospel offers us another narrative. We do not become faithful in order to persuade God to make us more faithful. We practice faithfulness because God has already showed up in our lives and remains with us. Our response is not an attempt to earn grace. It is our grateful response to the grace we have already received. God's faithfulness may be discovered in obvious blessings, but it may also be found in quiet and ordinary gifts. So I invite you in this moment to take just a brief second or two and reflect on the following. Who has offered care and friendship or encouragement to you at a needed moment? What great strength appeared when you believed you had none left? What opportunity, resource, forgiveness, second chance, or word of wisdom arrived without your planning on it? Where have you experienced the gentle presence of a friend, an offer to help, a conversation that proved healing, a safe space to share what is on your heart, protection, a second chance. What has sustained you through seasons you never expected to face? Great is thy faithfulness. Great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning, new mercies we see. All that we have needed, thy hand hath provided. Great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto thee. Amen.